Hello everyone, Pulse here and welcome to some more BlizzCon 2013 discussion content, particularly for the next World of Warcraft expansion, Warlords of Draenor. Now in this video we're going to talk about and focus on the actual story elements of Warlords of Draenor, what is going to be the driving force to lead us into the next expansion, and what are the kind of themes that we should look for going into it. And then we're also going to talk about the landmass that is Draenor as it's being presented in the forthcoming expansion. But let's start with the story itself, and it seems to go something like this. In between Mists of Pandaria and Warlords of Draenor, we have Garrosh Hellscream, now former Warchief of the Horde, awaiting trial for his crimes committed during Mists of Pandaria and for his time as Warchief in general, because he's just been a pretty bad dude, right? Before the final verdict and punishment can be decided and dished out, Garrosh is going to somehow escape, seemingly with the help of some accomplice that we don't know who it is yet, but it's apparently going to be somebody immediately familiar and somebody kind of famous in the Warcraft lore, and with the help of this kind of special person helping him out, and an item or a spell or any combination of those really, he's going to go through the Dark Portal and back to Outland. But not actually back to Outland. He's actually going to step through the Dark Portal and somehow convert it into a time machine of sorts. He's going to go through the Dark Portal, it's going to turn red from what we've heard, and instead of going to Outland as it was, he's going to instead go to the original home of the Orcs, which is Draenor in its former glory prior to the Shattering. Now, why is Garrosh doing this? Well, it would seem Mr. Hellscream, still hellbent and illogical as ever, is still wanting to create his one perfect horde, his Iron Horde he's calling it, which would be made up the Orc clans of old, prior to when they drank the cursed blood of Manoroth the Pit Lord. And what he's hoping to do is he's going to go back in time and unite the not yet corrupted orcs of Draenor into his one Iron Horde, and then take these still almost primitive orcish clans, these still overly brutal and sort of unsophisticated orcs as it were. He wants to take them through the Dark Portal and back to present day to effectively take over the world. So he wants to reign supreme. He feels that the orcs are the dominant race in the universe, it would seem, considering he is going from planet to planet and dimension to dimension and all that kind of nonsense. He wants to be the ruler. He feels that they are the right. They have that right, and that's what he's intending to accomplish. Now, this is really just the basic underlying story, and I can't really continue on with it without saying how unstable Blizzard has been when answering any questions that have involved the alternate timeline stuff, or time travel, or implications of time travel, or any other time-related questions, really. But one of the things that they keep saying that has been stable and concrete is that somehow this isn't a time travel story, but I'm not really sure how that's going to be, because when I think about this, it's the whole expansion is taking place on a continent that isn't existing in its present state in the actual present timeline, and that's where most of the content is going to be. So I'm not sure how you can say it's not a time travel story when most of the content is on a place that doesn't exist in the timeline that we exist, right? I'm not even going to try to piece this together, honestly. The time travel paradox nonsense is maybe a turnoff for some people, but at this point, if you're still in love with the Warcraft lore and you haven't realized how ridiculous their time travel paradox craziness is with the Caverns of Time and Nosdormo and the ending of Cataclysm and all these other examples I could give, it's just, I'm not even going to try anymore. I can forgive that part because I'm really interested in the story, as convoluted and potentially cheesy as it may be with the time travel, to go back and interact with the really famous heroes and villains of the past, such as maybe Gul'dan and Ner'zhul and Grommash, and there's so many more really lore important characters that we're going to see. And it's what I would have to label as this kind of nostalgic wet dream for anyone that really loves and is fascinated by the story of Warcraft and its universe, and especially those who like the story of Warcraft 2 and how it all really began with the orcs coming through the portal with their big invasion force. It seems really cool, and I'm really interested to see how well they allow us to interact and how much fun we can actually garner from seeing these characters prior to their corruption and prior to their say, like, big climax moments where they've done some crazy stuff, like Gul'dan and Ner'zhul and all those characters that just did absolutely game-changing things. Now, I do want to mention, since we are talking about these pretty popular characters, that the big story for Warlords is about the Orc clans themselves and how each of those clans are indeed separate. They haven't come together yet. This is a war-torn planet where the Draenei and Orcs are fighting against one another, and the Orc clans are kind of squabbling amongst each other, and there's always disagreements, and there's all these different rules and things that are set and being broken. And what's going to happen is we're going to see how the Orcs were prior to becoming kind of the one horde, as it were. And as we adventure through Draenor in its complete and yet unbroken state, we'll be interacting with the warlords, the leaders of the clans, these big lore characters like Grommash Hellscream and Orgrim Doomhammer. And what's going to happen is we're going to go through the story of this land, this yet unchanged Draenor, and see these characters, but we've been told that we shouldn't expect to see them copy-pasted in terms of their lore and story, that they're taking some liberties with how these characters develop, because we are going back in time prior to when some big events happen, and maybe even some interactions with future characters could change how they turn out. For example, one of the ones I'm really interested in is how will Thrall change, and how will his father Duratan change if and when they meet each other. If that's a thing that happens, how is that going to change those characters, and what will happen there, and that sort of, that's just one interesting example I could come up with. Now, before we go on to the landmass that is Draenor and the different zones and what we should expect in terms of aesthetic when we go there, Blizz has been pretty tight on saying that Garrosh isn't going to be this huge overarching story piece. He is merely our launching pad into the next expansion. And even though he's going to play a fairly large role in the pre-launch event, and he's going to be our motive to get to Draenor in the sort of alternate timeline or pre-version of the Dark Portal, as we follow him there, the story itself is actually going to continue beyond the Garrosh character, and instead we should see a lot more unfold with the actual Orc clans and potentially other stuff that's happening in the current timeline as well, because they have said it's not a time travel story, as I said. So I'm hoping that maybe we even see some content implemented in the current timeline as a result of something done in the past. I think that would be the best way to interact with the timeline thing, but I'm not really sure if that's what they would do, considering they, again, say it's not a time travel story and implications will be minimal. But yeah, so we shouldn't worry about the Garrosh thing. A lot of people will worry that, well, damn, we're following Garrosh, we're going to have to fight Garrosh again, it's going to be a Garrosh themed expansion, and he'll be the end boss again. Everyone's kind of mad that he was the end boss in the first place, and Blizz is obviously not going to do that again, but they did say that we shouldn't worry so much. Garrosh will get his thing, he'll get his story, and it will either come to a close or it will be kind of pushed off to the side and funneled alongside more important events, more interesting events. Now that brings us to the zones and the map that is Draenor, and we're going to start with the two faction starting zones. For the Horde, we have Frostfire Ridge, which looks to be kind of the one half of Blade's Edge Mountains, at least what will be Blade Edge Mountains in the future, but it's going to be covered in snow, and the ogres are going to play a big part. They're going to be kind of the big enemy for the orcs in the zone, because they're still a powerful race in this point in time, but they are readily on the decline, and they're getting pretty savage and pretty desperate and aggressive. Now for the Alliance side, we have Shadowmoon Valley, actually, but instead of the really, really desolate and dark zone that is the Shadowmoon Valley now, instead we're going to have this very green, and I suppose it's going to be perpetual night, but it kind of reminds me of the Night Elf zones. It looks kind of like that. It's going to be very dark but mystifying, and then more importantly we have the Black Temple in the zone as well, which will be the big city for the Alliance, but it's gonna be that way because in this point in time the Black Temple isn't the Black Temple. It is still this holy place for the Draenei and by extension the Alliance as well as we come into the area. Now beyond these two starting zones, we have Taladar and the Spires of Iraq, which to me looks like two parts of the same whole that will become Terakar Forest during the Shattering. It looks to me like the Spires of Iraq, most of that is gone when Outland is created during the Shattering. So I'm curious to see how the Arakoa race act when they have their own land, because in Terakar Forest, they're kind of on the edge of existence, right? They have their one area and they're really aggressive and just mean and they're kind of twisted, right? So I'm curious to see how they are prior to the Shattering. Now speaking of Terakar Forest, I can't go on without mentioning Shattrath City, which will be in the game in its former glory as everything else is going to be, and I'm very curious to give the city a tour, as it's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite cities ever implemented into the game, and I'm really interested to see what they've done with it in the past version. Now speaking of former favorites, Zangarmarsh, it's gone. It's apparently gone, and it looks to be that the waterfront property now accommodating the north side of Shattrath is where Zangarmarsh is going to be in the future. Now I'm not sure if it just doesn't exist because it's underwater at this point in time, or maybe the zones are just compressed. I'm thinking it's mostly a zone compression thing, because as you all know, the Shattering separated a lot of the continent into large floating chunks. So I'm expecting Zangarmarsh to actually be kind of sprinkled around some zones, maybe on the edges of the Talador area in that northern front beyond Shattrath, and maybe even compressed into a large chunk of the Tannin Jungle, which is another zone, which is actually the Hellfire Peninsula area. It was actually once this thriving jungle, and we'll actually get to see it prior to becoming this huge orange area of unending leveling experience. I mean, that's what Hellfire Peninsula is synonymous with now. So I'm curious to see how much they've changed with the Tannin Jungle thing. Is there going to be any resemblance at all to the old Hellfire Peninsula? Honestly, I could give two damns if they changed it completely and we called it something else. Now, beyond that, we have the Gorgrond area to the north, which is kind of the second half to what I would call Blade's Edge Mountains, more than likely filled to the brim with ogres, much like Frostfire Ridge. And then finally we have Nagrand, which is most likely intact as it is, because it looks to be mostly intact during the Burning Crusade. So I'm curious to see what has changed going into the past. Now originally I would have said no floating islands, right? But they've got concept art already flowing around for the new version, the old version I guess, of Nagrand, and it still has floating islands. So I'm curious to see what has changed with that area. That one is also one of my favorite zones. Is a lot of fun, a lot of cool aesthetic going on there. Now I do want to mention Netherstorm. It's not going to be in the game right away, but they have said it will go into the expansion at some point, either in a future patch, and that they're cooking up something pretty nice for the island to the northeast of the continent of Draenor that would become Netherstorm. But you know what, guys, I think that's going to do it for me on this bit of discussion for Warlords of Draenor. But don't worry, because there is tons more to go over, absolutely tons, for this next WoW expansion, and I will be talking about every little bit of it. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, comment down below, and share with your friends. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you on the next one.